Welcome back to the Gut 360 podcast, your weekly dose of Monday morning inspiration to help you take back control of your health and transform your mind, body, and gut. I'm your host, Eli Brecher, a registered nutritionist on a mission to empower you to get back into the driver's seat of your own health. So grab a matcha and let's get into today's episode. I'm honored to have an incredible guest with me today. And when I first started this podcast, his name was right up there on the original list of dream guests to interview on the Gut 360 podcast. So I could not be more excited to welcome Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, known as Dr. B, to the show. Dr. B is a triple board certified gastroenterologist and lifestyle medicine physician and 3-time New York Times bestselling author. He's the founder of the Gut and Microbiome Center for Excellence, a telemedicine practice focused on personalized, cutting-edge research into practical evidence-based strategies. Dr. B helps people prevent and reverse chronic disease through lifestyle medicine. He's the author of Plant Powered Plus and shares free educational resources at theguthealthmd.com. What a bio. Thank you so much, Dr. B, for being here. I am truly so grateful to you for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Ellie. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm so excited about what we're going to dig into today.
Me too. Now, we all have 38 trillion microorganisms inside our gut. And we have just 30 trillion human cells. So we're clearly outnumbered. We're less than half human. So can you start by explaining why our microbiome is our greatest asset when it comes to our immune system and our health in general?
It's a shocking thing. I certainly didn't learn this in medical school. Part of that is that medical school was 20 years ago for me, and this entire thing has exploded in the last 20 years. So a lot of that has to do with the laboratory technologies and computers getting progressively more powerful. But, what we've been learning during this 20-year period of time is that perhaps the most important part of human health is the part of us that's not even human. And it's something that we actually recruit after birth, and it joins our team, and it turns us into, literally, the proper terminology is that we become a superorganism because we are blessed with these 38 trillion microbes living inside of us that are physiologically active and integrated with our digestion, with our immune system in a powerful way, with our metabolism, with our cognition, with our mood, with the expression of our genetic code. So, stepping back from my perspective as a medical doctor, you look across the landscape, and I'm not aware of any part of the body that is not connected in some way to the gut.
It's really mind-blowing. I mean, I feel like the gut is related to every system in our body. And I know in your new book, Plant Powered Plus, it was inspired by your patients with Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis because you felt that they deserved a solution beyond lifelong medication with side effects or a hyper-restrictive diet, you've said. So I just want to start by saying I've actually had Crohn's since I was 8 years old. And as someone who's learned the hard way how to support my gut through what I eat, after so many years of struggling through my childhood, my teens, even my first degree at university, this book contains the information I wish I had received as an 8-year-old. It's an absolute gold mine. So I would love to ask you, how many of our most common, most recognizable health conditions are connected in some way to inflammation? I mean, would you say there are some telltale signs of inflammation maybe at the root of all of these symptoms?
There are. And to me, the conversation around health should not be just exclusively, you have this disease, here's this medication, that medication is designed to address specific symptoms. We have to be able to move upstream from the diagnosis to ask the question, how did we get here? What is the root of the issue? What are the opportunities for both prevention or in a person who has a diagnosis, such as Crohn's disease or many others? What are the opportunities that we have to get to the root of that issue and to reduce the disease as much as possible? That doesn't mean that there's no role for medicine. There absolutely is. But the point from my perspective is, how can we possibly make people appropriately healthy if we're totally ignoring how we got here in the first place and the roots of these issues? So to me, inflammation is the story of our time. And as I was researching this new book, Plant Powered Plus, I really started, this was about 3 years ago, I started with a very basic question. How many health conditions are there that I can identify where there is a clear-cut science article, right, in a peer-reviewed journal confirming that that health condition is associated with inflammation? And I discovered over 130. Of course, Crohn's disease is one. Of course, autoimmune diseases, they all are connected to inflammation, as are all allergic diseases. But what surprises people is things that you never thought that were actually connected to inflammation, such as your mood, major depression, generalized anxiety disorder, ADHD, but also things like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, metabolic disease, diabetes, heart disease. These are all ultimately connected back to inflammation. So to me, as I step back, this is the root of the vast majority of disease that we are struggling to fight against in the modern world, both in the UK and in the US. And that's where our opportunity exists. If we really want to address these things at their core, we have to, number one, see that, and number two, create a plan for that. And spoiler alert, the plan is healing the gut, because the gut is so connected to our immune system. What I also discovered is they're totally inseparable. So if you heal the gut, you are in the process of doing that, making the immune system more healthy.
And what does that plan involve? I mean, I would love to give my audience some practical tips that they can start implementing today. So in practical terms, how can we tame that inflammation? Obviously by supporting our gut health, but what can we actually do to improve our microbiome, our gut barrier, restore its ability to support our immune cells?
Okay, so before we jump into this, let me just say something real quick, which is that, number one, each of these health conditions, whether it's Crohn's disease or something else, there's an opportunity to double click and deep dive into that specific topic, right? So on a level, it should be tailored to the individual condition, but even more than that, it should be tailored to the individual person. We all are unique. We have a unique microbiome. Discovering what works for us is an essential part of this. And so this is like literally the first page of my new book, is me saying in a note from me, the author, to you, the reader, I want you to know how to use this book. It's not one size fits all. It's about you finding your aha moment and then using that aha moment within your own life to transform your health. So now with that in mind, what we're talking about is healing the gut microbiome. And when we do that, when we make the gut microbiome more healthy, it becomes more functional, more capable of doing its job. And that's really important, because one of its jobs is actually to repair and restore the gut barrier. And this is key because your immune system lives in the lining of your gut. 70% of your immune cells, that's where they exist. So it's not a bone marrow thing. The bone marrow is basic training. And then these little soldiers, your immune cells, they get deployed. They go to where the action is. The action is in your gut. That's where you're actually interacting with the outside world. So when we repair and restore the gut barrier, that's like rebuilding the walls of the castle. And that allows us to protect those immune cells that are on the inside. And then they're not being asked to do so much. And in protecting them, they get safe and then they get better at doing their job. So that's the conceptual framework. So working within this conceptual framework, we want to repair the gut microbiome, to restore the gut barrier. This is literally the thesis of my new book. How can we do that? Diet, daily patterns, which is basically our circadian rhythm, which, by the way, is not just sleep, and it's also not just fasting, but it is those things. It also includes our morning routines, our evening routines. This is a huge part of what is discussed in my new book. Our connections to other people, connections to our sense of purpose, but also trauma, stress, acknowledging the brain-gut connection and how that impacts from the brain to the gut to inflammation, understanding those connections. And then last but not least, the addition of supplements, which can play a role. They're not the number one thing. I left them for last, but they do play a role. And to me, when I'm trying to make people healthy, it's all hands on deck. If I have things that work, I want the things that work. That's the bottom line.
I absolutely love that you take this 360-degree approach. That's what I'm all about. That's what we're all about here on the Gut 360 podcast. So I definitely do want to get into all the lifestyle and everything else. So let's start with diet. In fact, let's start with fiber specifically. I know you talk a lot about fiber. And one thing that makes me kind of sad is that many people with gut issues, Crohn's, colitis, IBS, SIBO, are told to restrict fiber in the long term. Often their hospital doctors, dietitians will say, oh, you'll probably, your gut's you'll digest food better if you just avoid fiber or stick to a low fiber diet. What's your stance on that?
Yeah, there's a reason for this. So first of all, we must acknowledge this. And I don't think that the people who followed this advice, it's not necessarily wrong. It needs to be contextualized and understood. So when we make a decision about how to approach our health, you have two basic choices. Do you want to focus on reducing the symptoms, or do you want to address the root of the issue and make yourself healthy? And in doing so, the symptoms go away. Right? So medications allow us to reduce symptoms. They don't necessarily address the root of the issue. And restrictive dietary patterns, where we eliminate foods because they cause symptoms, that allows you to, in the short term, reduce your symptoms as well. The problem is that you're not actually addressing the root of the issue, so the gut microbiome can actually end up less healthy in the process of doing that. Let me make a quick analogy, Ellie. So imagine for a moment that I hurt my knee. I was playing basketball, and now, it hurts to walk. If I want to reduce the pain that comes from that knee injury, I could lay on the couch. And I could potentially do that for the rest of my life. And I would never feel pain. And that's not what anyone reasonably would do.
Right.
I also wouldn't say that you should just power through it and accept the pain and tough it out. That's not reasonable either. I certainly wouldn't do that. But what I would do is I would enter into a systematic process of healing my knee that allows me to restore that function. And I would do it in a graded fashion, starting really easy and then progressively moving forward so that the pain and the discomfort are really minimized in the process of doing that. So that to me is really the story of fiber, or these foods that people identify and they say, oh, well, that's triggering you, whether it be whole grains or legumes. Those are common targets for this type of conversation. They say those things are triggering you. Okay. If you take those things and you slowly introduce them, you allow the gut, which is struggling to process and digest them, to get stronger and to heal. You add function because now the gut becomes more efficient at processing and digesting these types of foods that it hasn't previously been exposed to. And in doing so, you actually are healing your gut, and you will discover that you have less gut symptoms. But it does take that process in order to get there, as opposed to total elimination, reducing symptoms, but then the gut becomes less healthy in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with your approach. And sometimes, it's crazy how many people will be told on initial diagnosis that they're going to struggle to digest fiber, or that, initially in the short term, they should peel the skin of the cucumber and peel the skin of the apple. And then 20 years later, they're in remission and they're still peeling the skin of the apple. But you're absolutely right. I love your analogy. I want to talk to you about what you call the big three: sugar, fat, and salt. You say that we're evolutionarily wired to seek these out. So can you tell us a bit more about that, and also about how big food companies are maybe capitalizing on this with ultra processed foods?
So I think that we all ultimately on some level do enjoy these things. And I feel like it's a bit proven because we seek them out. And the reason why that is if you go back to 99.999% of human history, literally, everything leading up to the formation of civilizations, which is actually quite recent in human history, these were nutrients of scarcity that were required for our survival. So, sugar, things that are sweet, tended to be things that were safe for us to consume and provided a source of energy, because that sugar obviously is a source of energy. Fat is an even more dense source of energy. It's not as readily available if you're hunting and gathering. It's not so simple. I invite people to go out into the world with basic tools, leave behind, your complex 21st century hunting tools, and instead just use a rock and a stick. Good luck finding food. It is not that easy. And so the fat that we did get access to when living in a world where calories were quite hard to find and people were starving, that was of our benefit. So it became hardwired into us. We evolved to prefer these things. And salt is obviously required in order to sustain life. It's an essential nutrient. And for most of human history, we didn't have easy access to sources of salt. So we didn't have the ability to have a salt shaker that didn't exist for most of human history. You just had the environment outside. So we were hardwired to go after these things that basically helped us to maintain survival within an environment of food scarcity. That's where we come from. Our biology became adapted to that. That's the way that we're wired. And then suddenly you actually flip this on its head and you take us in the complete opposite direction, which is the total availability of sugar, the total availability of fat, the total availability of salt. And then it becomes far too easy for us to overconsume these things because we enjoy them and our brain, our body is actually seeking them out. And the food industry has discovered this. Their job, if I were the CEO of a food company, my job is to sell product. That's it. My focus is not your health. It doesn't mean that I'm being malicious about it. I'm not trying to make you sick. It's just not a part of the equation that I care about. My job is to sell product and to push our revenue as high as possible. So in doing so, if I discover that I can create products that bring you back, of course I would do that. That's the entire goal. And so what they have actually discovered is that if you take these three things, sugar, fat, and salt, and you combine at least two of them in sufficient quantities, to be even more specific, quantities that are not found in nature, right? Like unnatural levels of sugar, fat, and salt. When you combine those things, you are creating a product that we call hyperpalatable. And what that means is that as humans, we become ravenous. We are likely to overconsume it. We don't trigger our satiety hormones. And when we're done, we want more. So from the food industry's perspective, that's to their benefit. Of course, they've discovered this. Now they take advantage of this. And now we are littered with 70% of our supermarket being basically these foods.
Wow. I mean, it makes total sense. And as you say, if you are the CEO of a food company, you have one role, you have one purpose to sell that. And so once you understand this equation of how to create a hyperpalatable food, what else are you going to do? I hate the word guilty pleasure, but what is your favorite hyperpalatable food if you had to pick one?
Oh gosh. I mean, like I would eat potato chips all day. I will not buy them and bring them into the home because yeah, it's too dangerous. Like I'm gonna completely ravenously explode through that bag. And like, what do you know? Potato chips, it's high carbohydrate, right? It's potatoes. Which by the way is part of the formula. It's not just sugar. It can be, very refined carbohydrates. It's high carbohydrate, it's high salt, and it's fried. So it's the perfect food.
The perfect combination. So before we move to talk about lifestyle, there is one condition that I wanted to ask you about, one that's gained a lot of awareness in the wellness world recently, and that is SIBO. So for someone who feels confused or they've seen SIBO, kind of people talking about it on Instagram, what actually is SIBO from a scientific perspective? And is that different from general gut dysbiosis?
These are really good questions. And this is a complex topic. So let me start by saying that there's a lot for us to still figure out. And it becomes hard because the genie is out of the bottle. People are pursuing, like in the public realm, people are pursuing this diagnosis, pursuing treatments for this diagnosis, when I would actually argue that even the testing that we have available for these diagnoses is actually not good. So SIBO stands for small intestine bacterial overgrowth. And basically is referring to is the excessive presence and the consequences that come from bacteria or other microbes growing within the small intestine. When we talk about 38 trillion microbes, they're supposed to be concentrated inside of our large intestine, which is the colon. That's the last part of the entire sort of operation as things move through, like down the conveyor belt, basically. But if you were to move those microbes upstream into the small intestine, they're not supposed to be there. They're certainly not supposed to be there in high concentrations. And because they moved upstream, they're getting access to the nutrients in food in a spot where they can start to do things to that food that actually creates problems like bloating or potentially leading to diarrhea or gut discomfort. So is it the same as gut dysbiosis? I think it's a variant. This is the way that I feel about it. So for example, Ellie, not to get too nerdy here, but like Crohn's disease to me is actually, we need to be more specific because there's different types of Crohn's disease, right? So dysbiosis is a broad term in a similar fashion. but I think that there's different forms of dysbiosis and the ways in which it may manifest. And so I think this is a unique form of dysbiosis because you don't see this occur when a person has a healthy gut. I'm happy to dig deeper into this, but I think that the way that I tend to approach this is that my goal is to heal and restore the gut, to address the underlying dysbiosis, and to achieve better bowel motility or rhythm. And in doing that, you will see the resolution of these symptoms and you will emerge with a healthier gut in the process of doing so. And that's how we ultimately get people to a place where this goes away and it doesn't come back.
Yeah, definitely. I think increasing our regularity, our motility, and as we said, taking that whole 360 approach is really important here because SIBO is one thing that can be quite affected by our nervous system, our stress levels, as all gut conditions can as well. And actually, one of the pillars of the mind, body, gut method, which is the system that I developed to help my clients to transform their gut and their well-being, is the circadian rhythm. So I wanted to ask you, in your book, you talk about creating consistency to support our biological rhythm, our circadian rhythm, around meal times and sleep. And you reference this really interesting study about jet lag resulting in dysbiosis in our gut microbes being kind of out of balance, which was so interesting. So I'd love for you to explain, firstly, about that jet lag study and how that's not only in the case of jet lag, but just with our circadian rhythm being thrown off track sometimes, what the significance of that, and then also what steps we can take to support that natural body clock and why it matters.
Yeah, so jet lag is just, to me, one example of circadian disruption. So disrupted sleep would be another example, or like literally alcohol consumption by itself can be a form of circadian disruption. But there was this interesting study that I think sort of frames a conversation around the impact of the gut microbiome within the context of circadian rhythm, where they took a group of people and they flew them from different places in the United States to Israel. So like generally speaking, it was on the order of an 8-hour time zone shift, this, when they actually were done. And in doing that, they measured their gut microbiome before travel. They measured their microbiome upon arrival, meaning jet lagged. And they measured the microbiome 2 weeks later, basically meaning, okay, like you've settled in and you're no longer jet lagged. Because of course it takes a few days to recover from jet lag. We've all experienced this.
Oh yeah.
And what they discovered, looking at, again, these human microbiomes, is number one, it was a very large number of microbes that were shifting in the process of this occurring. So more than 50% of our microbes are actually tied to our circadian rhythm. The second thing that they discovered is they basically so there was dysbiosis that occurred when they arrived and they were jet lagged. So the gut microbiome became unwell. And again, the only thing that they did is flew these people. They had a gut microbiome test from just like the other day. They hop on a plane and then they repeat the gut microbiome test and already it's become dysbiotic. They then went to see, okay, so what happens if we transfer these human microbiomes into germ-free mice and then sort of test the metabolism of these germ-free mice? So they're taking, this is going to sound bizarre to people who are not familiar with these types of studies, but basically they're taking human poop, transferring it into a mouse, and then seeing what happens because now that mouse has the human microbiome. And what they discovered was, number one, they could look at the blood sugar and they would feed the exact same meal to these mice. And the blood sugar response before jet lag and after recovery, it was basically parallel lines right over the top of each other. So in other words, like the microbiome is in the same place and the blood sugar is the same. But then they looked at the jet lagged microbiome and you see consistently the jet lagged microbiome has a spike in blood sugar. It is being fed the exact same food. So that's pretty interesting and wild. And then they also looked at weight gain. And these mice were fed the same food, the same amounts. They ate the food. Calories were the same calories. And they discovered that the jet lagged mice also became obese. And the others did not. So this to me like creates a conceptual framework of understanding the impact of circadian rhythm. There's similar data, by the way, with sleep disruption showing us that like, and I think we've all experienced this, we have disrupted sleep, you have less impulse control, you're more likely to reach for refined carbohydrate foods. So like sugars and flours and, donuts and things like this. So you're far more likely to eat that kind of food. And basically this is a setup for also out of control blood sugar, sleep disruption, shift work. Those are associated with type 2 diabetes and also associated with obesity. So like this entire pattern starts to really get locked in as you look at the different forms that exist.
Yeah.
So what can we do, you asked? So the most powerful driver of our circadian rhythm on a daily basis, because of course, circadian rhythm is a 24-hour clock.
Mm-hmm.
And your body has different physiology at night than it does during the day. And so the key moment is when we flip to nighttime to daytime, when we flip from daytime to nighttime, like those are the essential moments. And the signal that your body is paying attention to, which makes complete and total sense from an evolutionary perspective, is the presence of light. So specifically blue light, which are short wavelength rays that come from the sun. And so if you step outside in the morning and you get exposure to light, even on a cloudy day, you are giving your body what it needs to actually make that flip from nighttime physiology to daytime physiology. And then that basically sets the tone for the rest of your day. So literally this morning, it's quite cold where I live right now. I bundled up, I put on a winter hat, and I took a walk with my wife because it's that important. In the evening, it's the opposite. The absence of light is how our body knows, right? The sun goes down and therefore the body knows it's time for rest. So trying to stay away from bright lights, devices, like you don't want to be in a dark room holding your phone 3 inches away from your face at 10 o'clock at night. This is how you disrupt your sleep.
Definitely. I did the exact same thing this morning. It's freezing here in London. It has officially rained every day of 2026. And I put my coat on.
That's crazy.
It's a little bit miserable, but I took my umbrella, I took a coat with a hood and a scarf and gloves, and I went for a walk. And this is my morning routine. And I swear since I started doing this years ago, it has been a game changer for my sleep, for my energy for the rest of the day, and then even how I'm going to feel tomorrow. Because if I go for a walk this morning and then I sleep well tonight, then tomorrow I wake up energetic. So it's like a positive cycle that we should all be embracing. It makes such a difference.
We know we should be consuming fermented foods for our gut health, but have you tried kimchi or sauerkraut? This episode is sponsored by The Cultured Collective, whose kimchi and sauerkraut are naturally fermented, unpasteurized, and tested for live cultures, as well as being a source of fiber. They've won awards for their flavor, so I'm not the only one who thinks they taste amazing. It's really easy to add a scoop of these real live foods to all kinds of meals. I love adding kimchi to the side of my eggs and topping avocado toast with sauerkraut. They're offering listeners of the Gut 360 podcast a huge 50% off their kimchi and sauerkraut, so head to the show notes to find out more. This episode is sponsored by IM8. I've recently added IM8 Daily Essentials into my morning routine, and I've noticed a real difference in my energy levels and my sleep. It's clinically proven, with 95% of people reporting more energy, 85% of people reporting better gut health, and 80% of people reporting better sleep quality. I love that it has 92 nutrient-rich ingredients, including gut-friendly probiotics and prebiotics, and I confidently recommend it to my clients. Use the code GUT360 for a special discount and free welcome code on your first order.
I would love to pivot slightly to talk to you about the gut-brain immune connection and understand how our mind and our soul, as you touch on in your book, impact the body and the shape of our health. So stress, nervous system, how is that affecting us?
There are these things that when I was early in my career, being honest, I was totally dismissive of, right? And now the physiology is explained and it makes total sense. We have known for a very long time that people that suffer with gut issues, whether that be irritable bowel syndrome or inflammatory bowel disease, they're more likely to also suffer from mood disturbance. We've known this for a very long time. But now we finally have the ability to make these connections where we now get what's happening. So just to lay this out, Ellie, here's what goes down. Your body is constantly trying to react and respond to your environment. And there's an automated way for this to happen that you don't have total control over. It's called your autonomic nervous system, where when there's a threat, it reacts this quick. And that is the activation of your sympathetic nervous system, which is basically adrenaline. And we call that fight or flight. Now, to contextualize that, I just want to challenge the listeners to consider this for a quick moment. You're driving a car and you barely missed getting into a car accident, right? It was that close and it was going to be a bad one. You're breathing super fast. Your heart is pumping. Your eyes are locked in. You're totally focused. Your muscles and hands might be shaking from so much energy. That was your sympathetic nervous system. And that actually was activated before you even processed what happened with the car. That's how quickly this takes place, because the autonomic nervous system is going before your brain reacts. And what's happening there is the brain will release a hormone called CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone. And that CRH basically sets off the cascade of all these downstream effects. But in that moment of stress response, this is about survival. This is why we actually have this, right? If we were living again in these prehistoric times, this was what your body needs when you're under attack, or you come into some sort of threat. There's an animal that is threatening you, whatever it might be. It gives you what you need to react and respond in a physical way. And that is not the moment to be digesting your food or unwinding and taking a nap. You need to be completely and totally activated. So in the process of doing this, we sacrifice those things. We sacrifice the digestion of our food. We sacrifice our gut. This is why in moments of stress, people feel nausea. They might feel queasy in the stomach. They might feel bloated or feel like their gut is out of rhythm, or even have waves of cramps. Right? That is your gut-brain axis. That is the activation of your sympathetic nervous system, and it's sacrificing your gut, and that's why you feel the way that you do within that stressful moment. And we need to actually flip over to the other side, because digestion occurs in the parasympathetic state. That is our rest and digest. That is ultimately, if I were to boil it down, it's when your body feels safe. There is no threat, and therefore you can get into this place. The problem that we have, Ellie, is that the modern world, as we just sort of go about our business on a daily basis without paying attention to what I'm describing right now, the modern world has us in a perpetual sympathetic state. So we're constantly feeling the threat. We're constantly going hard. Even in the times where we could be unwinding, we open up social media and we get triggered, and it stresses us out. So we need to create space, and we need to be intentional about acknowledging and understanding the way in which we can get into a parasympathetic framework. In the book, I forget what page it is. I'm going to have to memorize this for the future, but I have a table that lays out the entire list of all these different things that you can do.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah. And it's look, of course, a massage is relaxing, right? Or acupuncture or meditation or sauna. But there's other things too, like human connection or prayer or listening to music and dancing. These are examples of things that ultimately can get us into this parasympathetic state. So we have to start to be intentional about creating space for that.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I know from my own personal experience, whenever my Crohn's has flared up in the past, it's been during a particularly stressful period of life. It was always during exam season at school or major life events, and when my health has been best, it's been at a time where I feel calm, I feel centered. I've been embracing breath work, meditation, yoga. It doesn't need to be expensive massage treatments, although I love those as well. But it can literally be as simple as going for a walk with your partner, having a long conversation with a friend, embracing, kind of romanticizing the little rituals of making yourself a nice coffee with frothing up your favorite milk. And, the little things make such a difference. And I feel like the results are really mirrored in your gut. It's not just your mental health that's, of course, going to benefit from that. It's your gut health, and then in turn, your immune health and your overall well-being.
Yeah, there's an entire downstream cascade that comes from that. And the body, we separate these things. We say the brain and the gut, they're separate. And the problem is that's not actually the way our body works. That's the way that we have sort of organized things because it's easier to understand. It's easier to create expertise if you have a narrow focus, right? So for me, I'm a gastroenterologist. It's a lot easier for me to just become focused on the gut and totally ignore the other parts of our body, such as a person's mood, the other aspects of our health. It's way easier for me to do that. But unfortunately, that's just not the way that our body works. Our body doesn't care. It's all interconnected.
Yeah, no, 100%. I know I just touched on coffee quickly, and that actually reminded me that I wanted to ask you something you mentioned on Stephen Bartlett's podcast recently is that you're a big fan of matcha, which I was so happy to hear because I'm obsessed with matcha. I drink it every day religiously. So can you tell us why matcha is so good for us?
Oh my. So both coffee and tea, but particularly matcha, can be an excellent source of polyphenols. And polyphenols are, you think about it like the colors of our food. So you step into the supermarket, every supermarket across the globe, they always put the colorful food right up front because we're naturally attracted to that. And so these polyphenols, these are things that people have all heard of: quercetin, resveratrol, curcumin from turmeric. These are examples of polyphenols. So it turns out that we require our gut microbes to activate 95% of them, which actually makes them good for our gut. The daily consumption of these types of beverages that are high in polyphenols gives your gut a consistent source of something that it can react and respond to and then actually get stronger. But matcha has a particular polyphenol called EGCG that is densely concentrated, and a big part of the reason why is that matcha is best served in a powder form where you're actually consuming the entire tea leaf. So you're catching it at a high polyphenol moment in terms of the growth cycle of tea, and you're turning it into a powder, and then you're consuming that whole powder. So they've discovered that the EGCG content of matcha is far beyond anything that you'll find in other forms of tea. And to me, that turns it into like one of the ultimate gut health drinks that exists. And I think it's also a strong argument for consistency.
100%. This is music to my ears. I love to hear this. And you mentioned all that different color. So I tell my clients, eat the rainbow, make your plate as colorful as possible, because then you're going to be loading up on these antioxidants, these polyphenols. One last question before we move into a fun quick fire round. So when it comes to the infant microbiome in particular, what can we do to support it? Because I'm at a stage in my life where all my friends are starting to get to that stage, having babies, and they're all asking me, what should I be feeding my baby? What can I do to support my baby's microbiome? So what can I tell them? What can I tell everyone who wants to set their child up for success from day one with a healthy microbiome?
Well, so first of all, I have 4 kids, and so I've been through this now a couple of times. In fact, my youngest right now is 2, so she's in the midst of it. So let me explain sort of the evolution of our microbiome and how we get to where we are as adults, which is that it generally seems that there's very limited exposure to any microbes in the womb. There may be some, but there's not much. And then the water breaks and delivery begins. And this is actually the first exposure to our microbes, particularly passing through mom's birth canal. It's fascinating to consider that actually there's a vaginal microbiome, of course. And the vaginal microbiome undergoes a big shift during the 3rd trimester. And it actually becomes much more like mom's gut microbiome. And so then as baby passes through the birth canal, baby basically receives for the first time exposure to a new family of friends, these microbes that start to join up and become a part of baby's gut. And as the days progress, and by the way, anyone who's had a child, they know on some level what I'm describing, because a baby's poop, this is a weird thing, but a baby's poop in the first few weeks, there's no smell, or very, very limited smell, because there's not really much of a microbiome there. Anyway, this starts from that time point of like basically being a fresh start, and it progresses to, by the time a child is 3 years of age, they have a fully formed adult-sized microbiome. There are key sort of levers that can be pulled to try to optimize this. So one is, let me first say, no one is perfect. I'm certainly not perfect. And also, like, we don't have total control over a lot of the factors that I'm going to discuss. Don't feel bad if it's not exactly the way that I'm going to describe, because even in my own family, it's not exactly the way that I'm about to describe. So just be aware. But having a vaginal birth is clearly advantageous to the child, as opposed to cesarean section. All 4 of my kids were born by C-section. Not what we wanted. That's what happened. And then after birth, whenever possible, breastfeeding as opposed to bottle feeding has clearly been beneficial to the development of the gut microbiome within the baby. A big part of this is, and I find this to be fascinating, that mom's breast milk contains over 200 varieties of these things called human milk oligosaccharides, HMOs. It's not just one, there's over 200 of them. And these HMOs serve no purpose for the baby directly. They are 100% there to be food for the developing microbiome. They basically are fiber supplements for the baby found in mom's breast milk.
Wow. Nature gives us everything we need, doesn't it?
It does, and the problem is that as this discussion, this is like a far more recent thing, because I remember years ago when I used to talk about this exact same topic, the formula companies hadn't yet caught on to this. And so the formula companies have now at least caught on and said, okay, well, we're going to add a fiber supplement. But the problem is they do a monofiber. So breast milk provides over 200 varieties. That's many different types. And our formula that we provide, most of them now contain like a single type of fiber. It's not the same. Anyway, breastfeeding whenever possible is preferred. I should add, many places, there's a milk bank. So if there's something that's holding you back, you should explore this option, because there are people who donate. And if you can be a milk bank donor, you should be a milk bank donor, because it helps other families. And then the families who need it, just know that this resource is available out there. You need to explore this. So around 6 months of age, you start feeding your child, and there is an explosion in the microbiome that occurs as you do this. The microbiome starts to react and respond to whatever it is, the food choices that you're presenting to this baby. So during this period of time from 6 months through 3 years of age, it's not going to be perfect. It can be very hard at times. But what we don't want is to be the microbiome building coming from ultra-processed food. That's not adding anything. What we want whenever possible is for it to be coming from plant-based foods. When you look at the vast majority of baby food, like talking about from 6 months to 12 months of age or something in this range, the vast majority of baby foods, they're plant-based, right? And it's pretty simple. You would basically like boil the food, soften it up, and then just grind it and break it down.
Mm-hmm.
Turn it into like a sauce, like applesauce. So these are some of the key drivers. And then the third thing is, so whenever possible, we would prefer to avoid antibiotics. It doesn't mean that, like if a child needs antibiotics, you give them. My kids, some of them have received antibiotics and some have not. So as we build healthier kids, the hope is we don't need antibiotics, and therefore we're protecting their gut. So these 3 factors, birth by vaginal delivery, breastfeeding, and then like healthy, mostly plant-based food from 6 months onwards, and lastly, antibiotic exposure, are the sort of key things that help to form that microbiome during this period of time.
So interesting. I will report back to my friends. Or they might even be listening to this, but I think that's really, really helpful. We finish each guest episode with a quick fire round. So are you ready?
Ready.
What's something that seems healthy but often backfires for your health?
Gosh, I'm not good at these quick fires, but I would say most juices. Most juices are just sugar bombs.
What's one habit you see clients struggle with the most?
I think implementation. So I tend to believe that the easy part is the advice. Like you could read my book in a weekend and you will have downloaded the advice that you need to be successful. And it does literally nothing unless you're able to actually have the audacity to put it into practice. So to me, implementation is the key.
That brings me nicely on to my next question. What is one gut healthy habit people can start implementing today?
Well, we talked about it in the show that both you and I have said it was life-changing to add morning sunshine to our routine. And so try to take a walk outside in the morning, even when the weather is not ideal. get that light exposure, look to the sky. You will feel more energy. You'll have better focus. You'll have more cognitive endurance, and you will sleep like a sweet little baby that night.
You will. What's your favorite gut-friendly food?
So I feel like I have basically become the person pounding the drum for legumes because they're gut superfoods and they're dirt cheap. And groceries are expensive these days. I mean, gosh, I feel it. We have 4 kids. We have 6 people in our family that are eating. But to me, you can make your gut healthier, make it stronger. You can reduce your risk of disease. You can extend your lifespan with food that is not expensive at all. It's just humble.
Do you have a favorite legume?
My wife. So we have this thing in the States called an Instapot. And basically it's a machine that does pressure cooking.
Yeah.
And it's so easy. You throw the beans in, you add the water, and then she'll throw in some garlic and onions with some black beans. And literally when it's done, I don't even need anything else. It's so delicious. Literally just give me a spoon and let me go.
I love that. Sounds amazing. What is your go-to breakfast on busy days?
All right. So full disclosure, I'm a big believer that breakfast is something that we should do. I think it actually sets us up metabolically for the entirety of the day. I think it reduces the likelihood that we're going to overeat later on because we have a high quality breakfast. That being said, most days I don't eat breakfast. When I do, it's usually on the weekend. And I'm a big fan of like taking some form of yogurt and adding in berries, nuts, seeds, and cacao nibs. And that makes me very happy. It's a great blend of like, you got your fiber, you got your polyphenols, you got your protein. Perfect breakfast.
Yum. That sounds amazing. Right up my street. What's one thing you personally got wrong early in your career?
So I think it's important to be able to acknowledge things that you do get wrong, because I think that's part of transparency. I got it wrong on fermented dairy. I used to believe that all dairy was inflammatory. That was not right. That actually fermented dairy, if you look at the evidence with clarity, systematic reviews and meta-analyses, it is in fact anti-inflammatory. Now, whether or not a person should consume dairy, just to be clear, is a different question, because whether or not something is inflammatory is not the only question that exists with regard to our health. So there are other things that exist in dairy products that we may or may not want to have exposure to, as well as I think that like it's important that we align our values with what's on our plate, because that's part of being an authentic human. So to me, whether or not a person consumes dairy is a personal choice, but it is not inflammatory when it's fermented.
Super interesting. What is one healthy habit you're still working on?
So the big thing for me that's arrived, and I discussed this in chapter 8 of my new book, things have gone in phases for me. So like nutrition was like the thing that happened real fast back in 2012, 2013. But it's been much more recently that I've opened up to my spiritual purpose. And it's actually been life-changing for me. And without digging into greater details, you and I discussed for a brief moment before we started recording that I had a major thing that was a bad thing happen recently with our family. And guess what helped me during that period of time? The fact that I have a belief system, the fact that I believe that there's something bigger. It helped me to process this bad thing that happened. And it was the most important thing by far. And it helps me on a daily basis in terms of like framing myself and having self-esteem and also framing my priorities. So for me, I think that like spiritual stuff is not something that we discuss often enough within the world of wellness. Yet I actually think it's quite important.
I couldn't agree more. I think it is the missing piece of the puzzle for so many people.
Yeah, I know. It was a missing piece for me for a very long time. For me, when I write these books, forgive me for this. As a medical doctor, when I discover things that completely change my life, I really want to share them with other people. And that's ultimately becomes like what I write about.
That's amazing. I love it. We have 2 more quickfire questions, fun ones. If you could only do one type of exercise for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh, man. One type of exercise, I would probably say basketball with my son, because it is good exercise. It gets the heart pumping, but I also enjoy doing athletic things. And I particularly enjoy doing things with my son where we get to bond together.
That's so sweet. And the last question is, what's one word that you associate with a healthy gut?
I'm going to say consistency. There's a couple different choices that you could go with, but there is tremendous power in consistency. This can be manifest through our circadian rhythm, and this can be manifest through our supplements, and this can be manifest through our food choices. So in each of those things actually help your gut to build. So we were kind of touching on this a little bit when we talked about the matcha, because most people who do matcha, most people who do tea, most people who do coffee, they're actually pretty consistent with it. And that actually turns them into gut superfoods, even though 1 cup of matcha, 1 cup of coffee by itself is not that powerful. But every single day, super powerful.
Consistency is everything, and building in those habits, those everyday healthy rituals into your routine makes such a difference. Thank you so much, Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, for being a guest on the Gut 360 podcast. If someone wants to learn more about what you do, what's the best place for them to go? And before you tell us, can I just say I cannot recommend Dr. Will's book more highly, Plant Powered Plus. I devoured it. It was so fascinating. And like I said at the start, I feel like it's the book I wish was handed to me as an 8-year-old, or as soon as I was old enough to read it and learn it and understand it. It's absolutely brilliant. So go get the book. But where else can people find you?
So I would say my home base is theguthealthmd.com. And if you go there, you'll learn about everything that I'm doing, the different ways that you can connect and interact with me. There's actually a number of options, and it really depends on like what works best for you as an individual person. But there's also tons of free options like my newsletter that I would encourage people to take advantage of. You can also find me on social media. So I'm the Gut Health MD, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So I would love to see people there.
Brilliant. Thanks again, Dr. B, for your time. And thank you guys for listening to the Gut 360 podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you send it to 3 people in your life who you think it could benefit. We need to keep the gut health conversation going. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll be back in your ears next Monday.